I'd like to welcome everybody to this first of four lectures in a series that we're calling Buddhism and Social Change, because this is part of a course by that title, which has actually been offered here at Harvard and in fact here at the Divinity School, formerly, since about 1991 or 92. And we'll be talking, as you can see, about Dr. Ambedkar and his movement in India, which I discovered shortly after finishing my doctoral work at Boston University with a number of wonderful courses here with Professor Nagatomi. And I went to India and I discovered this movement and met many of the luminous leaders and individuals who are part of the movement. And I gave a talk in the Harvard Buddhist Studies Forum, and Diane X said, would you like to build a course around socially engaged Buddhism primarily in Asia at that time, but later on we included the West because, as many of you know, Buddhists have become very active in a number of social causes, including human rights, the environment, and anti-war, and so forth. So the course, Buddhism and Social Change, which Diane X suggested the title many years ago, 20 years ago, has been continuously offered in FAS, in HDS, and more recently, since I retired from the Extension School, continuing ed in the Dean's office, through the Extension School. And so many of you here in this room are my students this term from the course, and it's so great to see familiar faces out in the audience. Thanks for making it all the way over here to HDS. We have a wonderful guest this evening who I will introduce her after some preliminary remarks and a PowerPoint on Ambedkar's career, briefly about his career, and how he fits into the study of religion. Because many of the rest of you in this room are part of the Buddhist Ministry Colloquium here at the Divinity School, and I welcome you as well. This program, this set of four lectures, is a collaboration between the Divinity School and the Extension School, with generous donations for speaker honoraria and so on from both schools. So I want to actually thank, specifically from the Divinity School, Willa Miller, who is helping out in producing these, Leslie McPherson Artinian, who is in the ministry office here, and Julie Gillette, who heads the ministry colloquium, but who has recently had twins, and I can't wait to see those pictures because I understand they are adorable, male and female twins. So I want to thank the Divinity School for giving us this beautiful place to have all four of these lectures. I encourage you to, many of my students have a copy of this poster, which was produced over here for the lecture series, but you can also look for the upcoming dates. I'll mention those at the end. The next one actually is November 7th, and so forth. So thanks, Harvard Divinity, for having us over here for these lectures. Then I would like to thank members of the Ambedkar community here in New England and in the Boston area, particularly Venkat Maraju, Umang Kumar, and Paul Malachi, who have been very generous in making arrangements for Dr. Omvedt, our guest tonight, to come up by train from New York, where she and her husband are visiting her daughter in Brooklyn, and to lodge them and to care for them while they're here. So thank you, Paul and Umang and Venkat, for doing that. And finally, Dean Mary Higgins and Mark Lax of the Academic Dean's Office at Extension for supporting this lecture series. Each year we have guest lecturers in my course, but we've never had the support to create a public lecture series out of this. So it's being taped, as you were informed. If you don't want your face to be on a videotape during the Q&A, you should be sitting toward the back. Otherwise, your voice will be heard and perhaps the back of your head. Or you can look around and say, hi, Mom, if you feel so inclined. So it's being taped, and some of you have already discovered the food and beverages in the back, which we'd kind of planned for afterwards, but if you feel hungry or thirsty, you can go nosh as we're presenting. So without further ado, I'd like to go through this PowerPoint because I don't want to take too much time. Dr. Omved's come all the way from India, really, to see her daughter, but to also share her research with us, and I will introduce her after some of these preliminaries. As I mentioned, my first visit to India was in '87, and I changed from simply visiting famous places to meeting many of the people in this movement. And so I'd like to share a little bit about, you'll see some pictures of some of the folks that I've met and who have become close friends of mine. But also I want to place tonight's discussion in the context of the study of religion. And this PowerPoint was actually created for a conference last March at the Barry Center for Buddhist Studies, raising the question, is Buddhism being really taken over by secularism? Because, you know, we have all the meditation centers, we have people practicing mindfulness, so on, just like yoga, and beginning to really detach it from its religious roots. But in using the word secular or religion, it raises the question, what is a religion? So I'm not going to go deeply into that. I do more of that in my world religions course. But I do want to raise a question of to what extent do we consider Ambedkar's movement not simply political or social or even economic, but deeply religious, deeply spiritual, in ways that I would like to argue for, but very briefly, because I know that Gail, if I can call her familiarly, is also going to address some of the questions that have come up about Dr. Ambedkar's Navayana, or New Vehicle Buddhism. So here are the basics of Ambedkar's life, okay? Born on a British Army base in central India in 1891, tutored by his father, an army officer and schoolmaster, who nevertheless was very low caste, Marathi in the state of Maharashtra, where Mumbai is, the Mahar caste, a very low caste, but the British colonial army accepted people from all caste backgrounds into the army, and Ambedkar's father happened to be literate and a schoolmaster, so he tutored his son, his 14th child, because he was very bright and the parents could see that he showed terrific promise. So he became the first or possibly second untouchable to graduate from high school and college in India. He won scholarships and earned doctorates at Columbia University, the London School of Economics. He passed the bar and launched the civil rights movement for untouchables in the 20s and 30s. He represented untouchables in the various negotiations with the British, the famous Round Table conferences in London, and many of the inquests in India to find out what the problems and demands and struggles of low caste people were in India. And the British were essentially wanting a nation that would both represent and serve the needs of all of its citizens. He was appointed the first law minister of the Republic of India by Nehru, the first prime minister, in 1947 upon independence, and he drafted and led the ratification struggle or negotiations for the Indian Constitution in 1950. So he's considered a founding father of the Republic of India. 1935, he gave a famous speech after a number of civil rights campaigns, one for access to drinking water, which led to a long court battle, and finally after 10 years, they won the battle, gaining low caste people access to public drinking sources. That seems like a no-brainer, but if you remember, our civil rights movement had to do with separate drinking fountains and so on for blacks and whites. And the other struggle was access to temples for worship for low caste people. And that lawsuit never went anywhere, basically. Brahmins were unwilling to give up the right to say who could enter a temple. So finally in 1935, Ambedkar said, "I was born a Hindu, but I will not die a Hindu." Hinduism seems unwilling to address the problem of caste, which seems to be related to or is justified by ancient Hindu scriptures. In the 30s and 40s, he engaged in research and travels to study options other than Hinduism for over 100 million Buddhists 100 million untouchables, who later were called Dalits, or oppressed individuals. And so his scholarly approach to this was also an existential one, trying to find a religion that would meet the spiritual, social, emotional needs of a vast percentage, 16% or so, of the Indian population. In 1956, he embraced Buddhism publicly with 380,000 followers on the first day, but many more on the days and weeks that came, probably over a million within the first year or so. And by 1960-61, the number of Buddhists who were declared on the census forms had increased by 1,000-fold, 1,000% increase in Buddhism in India because of this conversion movement. He completed his final work, The Buddha and His Dhamma, which is the Pali dialect for the word Dharma, which most of us know, is the teachings of the Buddha, and died 6 weeks later after the conversion in 1956. Now, I'd like to quickly go through these next slides because they look very technical, so I'm not going to burden you with it. And for my students, don't worry, it's not going to be on the final, okay? But we already talked a little bit about what is a religion. In India, could be considered a combination of devotion, sacred knowledge, and conduct, or bhakti, jnana, and karma. Karma is a word most of us know. But you can define religion that has these three components interwoven in a kind of braid. The Buddhist refuges are in traditional jewels or refuges are a way of defining a person's identity as a Buddhist. So one takes refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. And this means, refuge means I show deep veneration for the preceptor, the Buddha himself, as an exemplar, a cult figure, or even later in Buddhism, perhaps a kind of deity. The Dhamma is the precepts and tenets of Buddhism. It also includes mental training, scholasticism. And finally, Sangha, the monastic community, but also the lay community that supports the monks. So those two lists of three categories map onto each other fairly well. Now, the Navayana, or new vehicle, is a way of comparing it to the old yanas. In textbooks, if you study Buddhism, you will see Hinayana, or Theravada, which is the orthodox ancient Buddhism of South Asia, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Cambodia, Burma. And so if we look at Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha there, we might say these categories are leadership, ideology, and institution. And in the earliest Buddhism, we have leaders, the monks called arhats, or accomplished ones, chief disciples, the Dhammaraja, that would be a king like Ashoka who embraced Buddhist principles. Ideology, recited and inscribed in the Pali language, is things like the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the precepts, and so on. And finally, institution, the monks. These are the precepts or rules that surround the life of a monk. Royal patronage was also an institutional feature of Buddhism really throughout its history. Now, the Mahayana, or great vehicle, which has many types to it, Indian style, Pure Land style, Zen style in East Asia, and so on. Once again, the three categories, leadership, ideology, institution. The bodhisattva could be a layperson, ordained, or even a heavenly deity of a kind of a saint, or a scholar who pledges to help all beings, to save or rescue others, or to teach them the Dharma. Ideology, wisdom and compassion, the notion of emptiness, that is the fact that all things are deeply interrelated and not independent of one another. Devotion to holy beings, devotion to the path itself. And finally, institution, universities, missions, lay societies, and again, royal patronage. And finally, Vajrayana, that's the Buddhism of the Himalayan countries, Tibetan Buddhism, and so on. Leadership, we have holy lamas, mahasiddhas, or adepts, tulkus, or reborn lamas who had a special quality. The Dalai Lama is the most familiar one. In ideology, I won't get into all this, mudra, mantra, mandala, scholasticism, debate. Some of you have taken an interest in Tibetan Buddhism and know something about these teachings. And finally, institution, monastic colleges, tantric societies, a kind of Buddhocracy in which the Dalai Lama and other important lamas have in temporal power, really, over a country like Tibet. And His Holiness said, I'll be the last Dalai Lama who actually attempts to be a temporal leader. So finally, a new yana, Navayana, which was a term that Ambedkar embraced right at the end of his life. He was asked by reporters, what kind of Buddhism of all these predecessors do you plan to embrace at your at your upcoming conversion? He said, well, I don't want to stir up the debates between the Hinayana and the Mahayana people. I'm embracing a Buddhism that would be acceptable to Lord Buddha himself. So let's kind of call it a new vehicle. Now, there was a paradox in what he said. He says it's going to be the true teachings of the Lord Buddha himself, but let's call it a new vehicle. So he was kind of having it both ways. And it truly was new in the sense that today many traditional Buddhists have a problem with some of the teachings that are there. And Dr. Omvedt is also going to address that in her remarks in a few minutes. So this new Buddhism, we look at our three familiar jewels or refuges. Buddha or leadership, we find in this movement in India and around the world. Lay activist intellectuals, politicians, reformers, social workers, writers, and artists. The Dhamma or ideology includes a notion of suffering which is more than your own suffering as a result of your cravings for pleasure or for point of view or for continued existence. It is the sufferings caused by social conditions, poverty, racism, casteism, oppression. Justice and human rights, secular education, natural, social, political sciences are all part of the notion of intellectual and spiritual advance that Ambedkar represented to his followers and that he exemplified in his own life. And finally, institutions, advocacy or service organizations that we sometimes call NGOs, non-government, of course, schools and colleges. Ambedkar himself founded 2 colleges. University's been named after him, several now at this point. And so this commitment to education is huge. Political parties, performing and visual arts and architecture, all inspired by his career. And finally, print, broadcast, and digital media. So you can go online, type in Ambedkar, and up pop many resources for studying his life and teachings. Secular slogans. A very famous slogan that you will see on many of his posters is educate, agitate, organize. There's a slight debate about which order those 3 words should come in. However, I always thought it came from the American labor movement because he was at Columbia in New York in the teens, 1913 to 1916. But upon further investigation, this was in fact a slogan of the Fabian Society, a socialist society in London, attributed to George Bernard Shaw, co-founder of the London School of Economics in 1895. And Ambedkar attended that school. So he got his a second master's and a second doctorate at LSE in 1923. For him, education was a key element in personal liberation. Agitation was a key element in social reform, and organization via democratic politics and judicial due process were keys to an enduring social change. And this is a famous poster that I've always liked, the 3 little kids there exemplifying the 3 concepts. Okay, this slogan is familiar to everybody because it's from the French Revolution. And in the 40s, these ideals were inscribed as Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was formulated by a committee that Eleanor Roosevelt headed up, as you know, but also used by Ambedkar himself in the preamble to the Constitution of India. So these ideals represented also the thing that he felt Buddhism represented or should represent in its manifestation. So how these slogans, these secular slogans, map onto the 3 jewels of Navayana. I think I might have gotten a little too fancy here with my threefold categories, which I guess I get a little carried away. Maybe I have a few more drinks or something. But it just was kind of fun to say, okay, Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, educate, agitate, organize, liberty, equality, fraternity. I just put it all together, and it just seemed, to me, it just seemed to fit and kind of click. Where fraternity means communities absent the intolerance and violence of caste, gender, race, class, and we would say today, we would add these categories to this catalog of human rights: sexual preference and disability. These have become important, deeply important to many people in the same context. So this was the question raised by this conference for which I made this PowerPoint. Is Ambedkar's Navayana religious or secular? In fact, is Buddhism, modern Buddhism, religious or secular? What's happening to Buddhism? These guys, by the way, were on the campus of the Navaloka Training Institute in Nagpur. And like many young leaders, they're being trained to go back to their various parts of India and become social workers. Kind of like Barack Obama chose to leave Harvard Law School and not take a gazillion-dollar job on Wall Street, but to be a social worker in Chicago for a number of years. So that's the kind of thing these guys are doing. Also, very bright, promising young leaders. So here, I'll just digress for a minute. I'm on schedule here. To ask the question, well, if secularism means the repudiation of religion, what is religion? I love this question. So, I mean, I spent my doctoral dissertation saying, what is religion, and does science help us to figure out what religion is? And I won't get into that. But if we say that religion is domains of human commitment that channel devotion, knowledge, and action, our former categories, beyond an action that there are domains of human commitment that go beyond religions. Consider patriotism, the arts, professional life, family life, even sports. I asked my wife, what's your religion? She says, classical music. Johann Sebastian Bach is my God. Right now, I mean, for a lot of people, the Red Sox is a religion, right? They're in the final playoffs. Will they make the World Series? Well, they've got to, otherwise my world will collapse, you know? So what is a religion? Well, it's something very deep for people, but perhaps you need to go beyond that. So a functional definition must complement, I'm sorry I misspelled complement there. It's supposed to be an E and not an I. Complement a phenomenological definition, or one that just describes what religion looks like. What religion does, not simply what it looks like. And here, the late Robert Bellah, who died this summer, sadly, was a great scholar of Buddhism. He wrote his dissertation here at Harvard on applying Max Weber's thesis about economics and religion to Tokugawa religion in medieval Japan. Bellah and Clifford Geertz, who both studied with Talcott Parsons here at Harvard in the 60s and 70s, developed one such definition, and this is slightly reworded, but it's what they both basically came up with. And Talcott Parsons' systems theory of religion was, religion is a symbol system that orients people to the ultimate conditions of existence. So that's a possible non-theistic definition of religion. If you take God out of it, it could the symbol system could include God, but it also could be a system without God. But the more important thing is it orients you to these ultimate conditions of existence. But art, science, and many other things orient people to the ultimate conditions of existence, as my wife pointed out one day at breakfast. So now what? Well, maybe, she said, without putting down her fork, religion is a simple system that orients people to the ultimate mystery of existence. So you can see, once you start debating what is a religion, the debate can go on and on and on at breakfast and at dinner and all the time. And scholars simply do not agree on what religion is, but it's a fruitful set of questions. So let's take that one. My wife's name is Alice. Let's take Alice's definition of religion and apply it to Navayana Buddhism, Dr. Ambedkar's style. For Dalits in India, The ultimate mystery of existence, you might say, is the fact that they have been made to suffer as untouchables for centuries in India. How is this possible? Given that, just like people with disabilities or people of different skin colors, they're just as smart and able and have as many potentials and aspirations as anybody else. So how is caste really possible? That's got to be a mystery, right? A social mystery, maybe not a universe mystery. The symbol system that makes this suffering tolerable, and I think I should rewrite this sentence because it's not tolerable, and the symbol system doesn't make it tolerable, but it perhaps casts it in a certain light, maybe understandable. Today is the knowledge that Lord Buddha and Babasaheb Ambedkar, and Babasaheb is one of the most familiar honorifics used with Ambedkar. It means beloved father or teacher or senior. Babasaheb Ambedkar fought to liberate them by honoring all people and by acting to end the caste system through education and activism. And this was one of my favorite kind of cartoon-like posters that show the life of Ambedkar in his various stages of life, his education and his marriage and his death and so on, but standing next to the Buddha, who is his inspiration through those many years. So in other words, a symbol system or the religious basis for this new Buddhism is the notion that Buddha's teachings actually shed some positive light or give hope to people who are being oppressed by the Indian caste system. So the Navayana could be called a socially engaged Buddhism. In spite of its secular slogans and trappings, and in spite of Ambedkar's disdain for some hallmarks of traditional Buddhism, the legend of Prince Siddhartha's going forth, leaving his family, seeking truth in the woods and so on, the Four Noble Truths, karma and rebirth, the monastic lifestyle, the new religion of Navayana Buddhism has transformed the lives of millions of low-caste Indians at home and abroad. And here are some photos that I've taken over the years. Some of them are kind of faded now because I started taking these back in the late 1980s. But this is the Nimgadi family in Nagpur, India. Dr. Nimgadi, Namdeo Nimgadi, was the second Dalit to receive a PhD in the United States after Dr. Ambedkar himself. And he studied soil science at the University of Wisconsin. And then he went back and became a professor. But he grew up in extremely poor circumstances. And his wife Hira, displaying a photo of their marriage picture, and their son Ashok, who is a doctor, a graduate of Harvard College, along with his brother and sister. All three Nimgadi kids went to Harvard College. And Ashok went on to Harvard Medical School and practices here in Boston. So you see the picture of Ambedkar on their mantle there. And so many of the photos I'm about to show you very quickly show a young family or a senior family who have a picture of Ambedkar in their home to inspire them to educate, agitate, and organize. So this is Rajesh and Usha Kumar, but they've taken the last name of Baud, which means Buddhist. So they're calling themselves the Buddhist family. That's their last name. That's their family name now. So, and their two kids, Vishaka and Dayashil. And those kids are kind of my adopted niece and nephew, and it's really great to have a close relationship to a family in another part of the world and to assist with their education by making pretty modest donations. You can help somebody go to a very good school, which I'm doing. And also, Rajesh and I have founded a small institute to teach English language, computer skills, and, quote, leadership, which is the teachings of Dr. Ambedkar in Bodh Gaya, the place where the Buddha traditionally is thought to have achieved his enlightenment. So that's an Ambedkar family right there. I'll just go through these quickly. So this is a young couple, also in Nagpur. These are some women in a very poor area outside of Mumbai. You see the picture of Ambedkar on their shelf there. And the girl to the right told me she wants to be a nuclear physicist. And I think she will. There's no question in my mind that she will. Another family, Lord Buddha, I honestly forget who the saint is in the middle picture, or maybe.
Ravidas.
That's Ravidas there, and then Babasaheb Ambedkar. Thank you. This is a girl who attends the Ambedkar Multipurpose High School in Aurangabad. This man is an education official in Mumbai, in Mantralaya, the state capital building there, and his wife did this needlepoint from a photograph. That's on there, in their living room. This woman left her husband, who was very abusive, and became a Buddhist nun. And she drew the charcoal picture of Ambedkar on that wall. This guy was actually a comedian, very funny guy. I met him in Pune. No, he was at the one of the campuses, one of the many campuses in Mumbai. But again, so you see the influence and inspiration of his teacher. These women would all be sweepers 80 years ago. Now they are social workers, school principals, teachers, and all had advanced degrees, all because of the inspiration of a person who said education is the key. This is Dr. Balchandra Mangekar on the lower left. He was, at that time, the Vice Chancellor of University of Mumbai. He became a member of the Planning Commission, the Central Planning Commission in India, which is really the Prime Minister's cabinet. And Mangekar is probably the smartest guy I ever met. He speaks English much better than I do, and very fast. I mean, hard to understand. His mind goes so fast. He gave a response to a lecture that I gave there at his invitation, and it was his response was twice as long and 5 times as, smart. So, but these are his associates. There is Bhikkhu Bodhi, one of the monks who was very active in the Mumbai area. And in the back, there's a young man from the US, from California, who's studying Buddhism there, and so on. So it's a very multifaceted movement. These are monks who attended the 50th anniversary of the conversion in Nagpur. These are, we would call them Girl Scouts. They're members of the Samta Sanik Dal, which is a service organization founded by Ambedkar in the 20s. And they were here to help the 1 million people who showed up for the ceremony in 2006. These are the Boy Scouts. Also, they had whistles, and they would help. They'd create a flying wedge if you need to get through the crowds to the other part of the fairgrounds, and they would blow their whistles, and people would part like, Moses in the Red Sea. Whoops. This is my friend, Dr. Rahul Dipankar. He grew up in a very poor village in Uttar Pradesh, and he became a doctor and has served for 30 years outside of Chicago. But now he's going back to India because he founded this school for girls in his village, Unchagaon, and it has, as you'll see in a minute, 400 girls, all of whom would not even be able to go to high school if it were not for using his personal wealth as a doctor, just a regular doctor, to start this school. So there they are. These are all girls who are, hoping to go to college. And actually, he was asked this question. I asked the question. He translated the question. How many of you are planning to go to college? So some raised their hand. I asked him later, why didn't some of them raise their hands? Because he said, very few of them will be able to go to college because there's no money. But the ones who raised their hand were saying, I'd love to go to college. That's what they're really saying. Not that I really think somebody will give me that scholarship to actually go. And this is the monument that was put up at the place where this huge conversion ceremony took place in 1956. Ambedkar's final words, not of his life, but that many people like to quote as kind of summing up his movement. Addressing 70,000 of his followers in Nagpur in 1942, Ambedkar prefigured his conversion there in Nagpur 14 years later and left Navayana Buddhists today with his thoughts on engaged Buddhism, religion, and secularism. My final words of advice to you is educate, agitate, and organize. Have faith in yourself. With justice on our side, I do not see how we can lose our battle. The battle to me is a matter of joy. The battle is in the fullest sense spiritual. It is nothing material or social in it. Ours is a battle not for wealth or for power. It's a battle for freedom, It's a battle for the reclamation of human personality. You notice how many times he uses the word battle. The concept of battle and struggle is not considered very Buddhist, and therefore that might be one of the reasons that traditional Buddhists say, this isn't Buddhism. Here's a guy who fought all his life for a social cause, when Buddhism is really about spiritual cultivation within yourself, sitting on a cushion, staring at a wall, practicing breathing, being mindful in your daily life. What's all this battle stuff? So that's what, this is a segue into what Dr. Gail Omvedt will be talking with us some more in just a moment. This is my last slide. He's wearing a button that says, I heart Buddhism. That's kind of cool, actually. I think that's very cool. Okay, so I'd like to actually turn this screen off, Dave, if we can do that. And I'd like to introduce our guest. Gail Omvedt was born in Minneapolis, USA, and took her MA and PhD in sociology from the University of California, Berkeley. She's been an Indian citizen since 1983 and has worked actively with social movements in India, including the Dalit and anti-caste movements, environmental movements, farmers' movements, and especially with rural women. She's been active in the Sri Mukti Sangharsh Kalval, which works on issues of abandoned women in Sangli and Satara districts of southern Maharashtra, and the Shetkari Mahila Aghadi. Most recently, Gail was professor for the Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Chair of Social Change and Development at the Indira Gandhi National Open University. She's also been consultant for the UN agencies and NGOs and has served as Dr. Ambedkar Chair professor at the National Institute for Social Work and Social Sciences in Orissa. A professor of sociology at the University of Pune, Asian guest professor at the Nordic Institute of Asian Studies, Copenhagen, and a senior fellow at the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library in New Delhi. She's been a visiting professor and coordinator at the School of Social Justice, University of Pune, and a fellow at the Indian Institute of Advanced Study in Shimla. Her most recently published book, co-authored with her husband, Bharat Patankar, is Songs of Tukoba. And I'm glad to see that Bharat Patankar is here in the front row with her, is meeting him for the first time. And so pleased that you could be here. A revised version of her dissertation, Cultural Revolt in a Colonial Society, the Non-Brahmin Movement in Maharashtra, was also published by Manohar in 2011. And there are about 20 other books that I won't read all of them, but there's one missing here I was pointing out. She has written a very nice, very succinct biography of Dr. Ambedkar. It's titled Ambedkar Toward an Enlightened India, and it's available from Penguin Viking. So if you're really intrigued by this lecture tonight and want to read a really short, beautifully written synopsis of his life and his influence, then go to Amazon and look up her name and that Ambedkar Toward an Enlightened India. And that would be something that you can take away from all of this and begin your own study of Ambedkar Buddhism. So Gail, it's a great pleasure to have you here in Harvard, and thank you so much for joining us.
Dr. Queen and friends, I'm honored to be asked to talk to you tonight on Dr. Ambedkar. I'm going to be speaking on Ambedkar's Buddhism. And this is a long story. As we shall see, Ambedkar did not simply take the Buddhism as he found it. Instead, he sought to mold Buddhism to meet the needs of his own community, the oppressed Dalits of India. Now, his was a long journey. You can say it probably began when he got his matric. He was presented by the Maratha social reformer Krishna Arjunrao Kiluska with a biography of Buddha. This was perhaps his first introduction to Buddha and Buddhism, and He must have read it, it must have stuck in his mind, but we hear very little about it immediately. He, after his matric, of course, he came to Columbia University 100 years ago on a scholarship. 4 years he spent in the US, during which time he wrote one of his major essays, Castes in India, The Origin, Mechanism, and Development, which was published in 1916, in which he said castes are enclosed classes. And he argued that it was Brahmins who first enclosed themselves as a caste, and then they were imitated by other groups following them, and by those castes who were, in a sense, forced to enclose themselves because all of the others were being enclosed against them. So this was an early essay. Now, when he returned to India in 1917. His first public meeting was held shortly after that, sponsored by the Maharaja of Kolhapur in Mangaon. And then he formed the Bahishkrut Hitakarani Sabha, or the Society for the Welfare of the Boycotted, and he began to take an interest in social movements. Now, I'll say a little bit about his first struggle, the Mahad Satyagraha. Mahad is a small town in the Konkan region of Maharashtra, where Dalits, as in almost every other place, we're not allowed to drink water from the public tanks or use public facilities. The Bombay Legislative Council had just passed a law throwing open these facilities to Dalits. And the Mahad City Council passed a similar bill. And Dalits at Mahad felt that they should do something about it, so they wanted to call Ambedkar to lead an agitation. After a good deal of cautious investigation, Ambedkar agreed, and the agitation took place. Now, interestingly enough, Ambedkar said, why do we want to drink the water? It's not that drinking the water is going to transform our lives very much. It's not that. It's simply a matter of water. We do have access to water of our own. But this is really a battle for the reconstruction of society. Just as the French Revolution was a battle for the overthrow of the old regime based on inequality, so we want to overthrow the old casteist regime based on inequality and establish a new society based on liberty, equality, and fraternity. So Dalits went to drink the water at Mahad. Following their first attempt, there was somewhat rioting against them. Rumors were spread that Dalits were going to go on and pollute the temples or something like that, so caste Hindus in the town rioted. And Ambedkar, in a sense, retreated. He came back in December. This was in March 1927. He came back in December for a final effort. But this time there was an injunction by the district official not to drink the water. And so Ambedkar decided to honor that, but instead he chose to attack an important symbol of Hindu justification of caste, that is a Manusmriti. He publicly burned the Manusmriti. And this was perhaps the first open targeting of Hinduism as being responsible for caste injustice. It was a dramatic event. It was really a dramatic event. So this was, in a sense, the beginning. Now, from there, Ambedkar went on. In the early 1930s, he had his confrontation with Gandhi. Now, this is important because Gandhi, in a sense, was a representative of the finest that Hinduism had to offer. But Gandhi opposed separate electorates for untouchables. He opposed Ambedkar's demands for social justice. And at almost every point, we find that Ambedkar finds himself in confrontation with Gandhi. In fact, they had differing views on very many things. Gandhi wanted an idealized village society. We called it Ram Raj. Ambedkar said villages are cesspools. Dalits should go to the cities. So Gandhi wanted to rebuild India as a society of villages. Ambedkar wanted an industrialized and developed India. So they were fundamentally different in these ways, as well as in their analysis of Hinduism and Buddhism. Following this, in 1935, Ambedkar made his historic announcement at Yola, the small town of Yola, "I've been born a Hindu, but I will not die a Hindu." Interestingly enough, 2 days later, Gandhi held a press conference, and he denounced it. Gandhi could not agree that Hinduism was at the root cause of untouchability. He thought untouchables could change their situation while remaining with Hindus. Ambedkar disagreed very, very strongly. He said, "I will not die a Hindu." He did not immediately announce a choice of Buddhism. He was for some time attracted to Sikhism. Now, he even sent, Sikhs came to appeal to him. He sent delegates to go to the Punjab to see. I think, in the end, one of the reasons he rejected Sikhism was because of the degree of caste discrimination that remained within Sikhism. This is an unfortunate, there's prejudice against Dalit Sikhs, and Ambedkar could probably find this out and he reacted against it. But he was interested in Sikhism. He was also interested in Buddhism from an early period, but it vegetated in his mind. It simmered there. He began to work to produce his own interpretation. So that when he finally chose Buddhism, he chose Ambedkar is what we call Navayana Buddhist. Now, what does this mean? In his introduction to his book, Buddha and His Dhamma, Ambedkar says there were 4 things about traditional Buddhism, or Buddhism as it existed in his time, that he could not agree with. Then one was the notion of sabam dukkam, all is sorrow. In fact, I think this is a bit unfair because Buddhism does not really say everything is sorrow. Buddhism says sorrow exists, but it can be overcome. But anyway, this was Ambedkar's interpretation. Second, he rejected the traditional reasons given for Siddhartha's leaving his home and going out in renunciation. That is, that Siddhartha had seen an old man, a sick man, and a dead man. Ambedkar said it's impossible that anybody of an adult age could reach an adult age and not see such sights as these. So he rejected that. He said instead Siddhartha had left home to avoid a water conflict between the Koliya and the Sakya clans. Now this is a little bit of foundation in the Jataka story. There's a Jataka story to this effect. But once having found out, that this conflict was there, he then realized that conflict was endemic to human society, and he decided to continue his search until he had solved the problem of conflict as such. So Siddhartha's going forth was to deal with the problem of conflict, not with the problem of seeing an old man, a sick man, and a dead man. Third, Ambedkar rejected the traditional notions of karma and rebirth. This is very important. As an untouchable, he could not accept the notion of karma rebirth because these served as a traditional justification for why people were untouchables, because you'd committed some kind of sin in your past life, and so were condemned to be born in an untouchable family. This he could not accept. Fourth, he rejected the notion of the bhikkhus as simply a world renouncer. He wanted to see the bhikkhu as some kind of social servant and a person capable of serving society. So these were 4 elements that were new to his Navayana Buddhism. And he perhaps reinterpreted karma rebirth, the notion of karma to include a social causation and perhaps some genetic inheritance, and so on. But he gave a new and a secularized, almost secularized, I would say almost, because it was still a very spiritualized approach. He gave a very new interpretation of Buddhism. Uh, Now, he mentioned Marxism in one of his essays on the Buddha and Karl Marx. He said, whatever is true, the residue of fire in Marxism, what remains is the idea that private property is the basis of exploitation. This he agreed with. And he said Buddhism also agreed with it, but the difference is that Buddhism would end this exploitation through nonviolent means rather than through violent means, and for this reason it was superior. He said, we aim at creating a new society based on liberty, equality, and fraternity. Socialism or communism can give us equality and fraternity, but not liberty. Only Buddhism can give us the three: liberty, equality, and fraternity. So his devotion to Buddhism was one in which he saw it as an embodying the traditional ideals of what in some ways went back to the French Revolution, but to him went back to early and original Buddhism, that is liberty, equality, and fraternity. So these were the main contributions of Ambedkar's Navayana Buddhism. And as we see, it was not a traditional form of Buddhism. It rejected much that was familiar to us in traditional Buddhism. But it was a very vibrant form. It offered a way out for millions of Dalits who followed him in mass conversion in 1956. He converted to Buddhism and died very shortly thereafter. He wrote his book, The Buddha and His Dhamma, in which he outlined the life of Buddha and his teachings and gave a new emphasis to it. With this, I think I'll maybe end my brief remarks, if it's not too brief, and throw it open for questions. Thank you.
So I'm going to actually take the prerogative of asking a few questions myself, because Gail and I had lunch together at the Cafe of India on Brattle Street maybe, 2 or 3 years ago? It was a while ago.
Huh?
When we had lunch together, remember, at the Cafe of India? So a lot is happening in India right now, and many people are very nervous about the upcoming election. There is a candidate for prime minister named Modi, who's a state governor, who is known for fostering communal violence and sectarian hatred and so on. But my question, Gail, is what is your assessment of the Ambedkar Buddhist movement today? What do you think is going on with that movement today? We were talking a little before the lecture about how conversions to Christianity have actually increased a great deal in recent years. And the Christian missionaries are not really talking about liberty, equality, fraternity. They're talking about becoming Christian and practicing the teachings of Jesus and so on. But Buddhism is a very different religion. So the question is, what is the status of Navayana Buddhism today?
Well, it's not only Navayana Buddhism. I mean, Ambedkar Buddhist Movement, I mean, if you also look at he founded a political party, the Republican Party of India. Now, today that is in a split and fragmentary condition. One of its leaders has recently joined the Shiv Sena. Earlier leaders of the Dalit Panthers also did that. So in that sense, the political movement is fragmented and somewhat ineffective, I would say. Buddhist movement, there's a lot of vibrancy in Indian Buddhism. A lot of discussion, things are going on, but to me, in a sense, there's no clear trend. I think it's also somewhat fragmented, somewhat scattered. Some of it's in the doldrums, some of it people are looking for new directions. Perhaps they don't know exactly where to go or how to go ahead in these times. So the political thrust is lost, the social thrust is a bit wavering. That in a sense is the situation, I would say.
So one of the elements in the evolving Buddhist movement is what seems to me to be a rather lively debate over the benefits of meditation. And I always think about two professors at the University of Nagpur when I bring up this subject, because Professor Paulo Conde is a professor of Pali literature there. And you know him, Paulo Conde, Gail? Do you know him, Paulo Conde?
Who?
Professor Loconde at the University of Pune.
Loconde.
No. Anyway, he has made many visits to Igatpuri and studied meditation, Vipassana meditation, under S.N. Goenka, who is a very famous meditation teacher who I understand just died last week in India, a great loss, really. And that 10-day Vipassana meditation retreat is very intensive. You meditate all the time. But many of the Ambedkar Buddhists have gone to that place and learned that style of meditation and claim that it really has made them much more mindful, sharp, aware, and effective as activists. But his colleague, S.N. Doke, who's a professor of physics, says that meditation basically makes you a passive person, makes you into kind of a nice guy who smiles all the time, puts you half to sleep. It's like a narcotic. Once you start doing it, you can't get enough of it. It's kind of like these yoga people who just have to have more and more yoga classes, and then pretty soon they're doing it in their bedroom, and it's just, you can't stop it. And so Doki and Loconde are actually very close friends, and they fight about this all the time. So I was having dinner with the two of them once at Loconde's house, and they just were fighting over meditation the whole time. I said, guys, just cut it out. Just drop it. Let's stop talking about it, But it is an interesting debate because those people who do meditate and don't simply do it for very selfish or personal or purely spiritual reasons will claim, and science is now claiming, and His Holiness the Dalai Lama is very interested in the medical investigation of meditation and its effects, does make you more alert, more sharp, more able to hear and understand what is going on around you, and potentially you could be a better social worker, activist, could be struggling, you could be involved in a battle for the reclamation of human personality because your meditation was assisting you. But there have been some books recently written saying meditation, once again, is a very bad idea, and it's actually a plot by the Brahmins to put everybody to sleep. So I don't know if you run into that at all, but I find it quite fascinating.
Well, you may make a distinction between Vipassana and other forms of meditation also.
Yes.
I mean, there are people who are, I think, against Vipassana, but maybe in favor of other forms of meditation.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, there are probably very few people who are against meditation as such.
Right.
I will say that.
Yeah.
Because they recognize its value and its significance and what they can do, what they can be capable of doing.
So it's often said that the Ambedkar Buddhists don't meditate because Dr. Ambedkar did not meditate, and he did not emphasize that particular aspect of the tradition, whereas many Western Buddhists and Tibetan Buddhists, who are numerous in the refugee communities in India, which is the subject of our last lecture in this series, believe meditation is very important in Buddhism. You can't just have Buddhism without meditation. Dr. Ambedkar, however, was a scholar and a politician, and it was only late in life, on a trip to Burma, that he consulted with a friend of his, a Dr. Soni, about the possibility of meditation. Soni recommended he should try it, but he admitted that his diabetes and his heart disease gave him such tremendous pain, and particularly in his legs, that meditation was at that point in his life out of the question.
Meditation was what?
Out of the question, because he was in too much pain all the time. And if you look at Ratu's memoirs of him, he was constantly requesting a massage because to finish all the writings he was doing in his final years, he needed basically medical help. And an interesting aspect of his biography, actually, is that shortly after he was appointed law minister under Nehru, his health began to decline because he was writing the Constitution, basically. And his diabetes was acting up. And no doctor in Delhi, all of Delhi, was willing to come help him with his injections, insulin injections. And the one doctor who said, I would come to your house and help you with the injections, you see, he was an untouchable still, even though he was we would say the Attorney General of India, that's what we would call it. No Brahmin would enter his bungalow. They call it a bungalow, but it was really a very nice government house because he's still an untouchable with 2 PhDs and all of these distinctions. So a Brahmin doctor from a very high caste of Brahmins said, I would help you with it, but for me to enter your house, we would really have to be married because people would start gossiping that we were having an affair. And so they discussed this, and they agreed to actually get married. His own wife had died while he was getting his education in the West, a young arranged marriage, a young woman, illiterate. Many, many years ago, he never remarried. But he married this woman partly out of the desperate need to stay alive, because she was willing to care for him as his personal physician. And her community rejected her for marrying an untouchable, and his community essentially was furious with him for marrying a Brahmin lady, and they claim today, many of them, that she killed him. Actually, she kept him alive for another 10 years by caring for him with the injections. So that's an interesting aspect of his life, and sheds, once again, some light on the problem of caste and how it separates communities, as you put it in your talk, puts them in separate boxes so they can't intermarry or even interdine or associate. I'd like to open it up to your questions now. Yes, Michael.
What's Ambedkar Buddhism's place in America currently?
In America.
I didn't hear that.
What is Ambedkar Buddhism's place in America?
What is what?
The place of Ambedkar Buddhism in America.
Buddhists.
So maybe
That's a good question.
Venkat, maybe you should come answer that question. Venkat's an American Indian. You want to come up and give that a shot? To what extent is Buddhism playing a role? Come, introduce yourself.
Yeah. My name is Venkat Maraju. I live in Boston area. So I call myself an Ambedkarite, but I was born as a Hindu. I'm where I'm at this stage of my life is I'm away from all religions, okay? I squarely, it's a religious neutral you want to use, or atheist, I don't know. But I can say comment. Unfortunately, I wanted to ask the same question that Dr. Queen asked Dr. Gail. This is one of the really intriguing question for me is, I know Dr. Ambedkar thought the ultimate emancipation is, it's because of the religious imposed oppression that Dalits and untouchability they were going through, and the only escape is move out of this religion. He saw there's no point in reforming Hinduism, or there was no point that anybody is making an effort, or is it worth? It was so deep rooted. So the only way out was, he said, move out of this religion. And he did that after about 2 decades of research and reflection and all that. And when he did convert with that many large number of people, unfortunately he died very relatively like 6 weeks after that huge conversion. If he was alive for like 5 to 10 years, we probably would have seen a very different India now with the Ambedkarism, Buddhism. Most of the Dalits adopting to Buddhism. That's what I personally feel so. But unfortunately, Buddhism in India also very, very, very minimal now. Even among the Dalits, except in Maharashtra, as they said, hardly anything is going. But I think one good news is just if you go and search the newspaper, just 1 week back, 100,000 people got converted in a mass conversion in the state of Gujarat. That is actually a very, very big thing happened in the recent times. So the Ambedkar Buddhism, if you talk in Indian diaspora or in general in America, it has to be only among the Indian untouchables who moved to United States, who are very, very, very small in number, and also not all the Dalits or all the untouchable communities who came from are hardly Buddhists. I mean, there are a lot of people actually, there are Christians, there are more Christian Dalits than Buddhist Dalits. And of course, a lot of people are still in the Hindu fold. So that's how I would put it. So it's not much big of a movement that is going on. That's a sad part.
Bharat, would you like to comment on this?
She has to answer that.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Gail.
About
What is the relevance of Buddhism to American people?
of Ambedkar's Buddhism or Buddhism in general? Well, first of all, from Ambedkar, you can learn that one need not simply take religion as it comes. One can be creative in one's interpretation of the religion. One can innovate. One can, move ahead and, adapt it to the needs of the community that one lives in. I think this is one of the significant aspects of why he's relevant. Second, Ambedkar is probably the most important unrecognized great man of India. I mean, people know about Gandhi. Everybody knows about Gandhi, but very few people know about Ambedkar. And yet, to my mind, I mean, he was greater than Gandhi. He led his people through thick and thin, through so many years, through so many twists and turns of struggle, and ended up becoming the person who drafted the Indian Constitution and saw it through Parliament. I mean, in this sense, he was the great man of India. And he deserves to be better known in the U.S.
Go ahead, Bharat. Come up here and talk. Yeah, I use this one.
No, I think that if you are talking about relevance to American people, you have to look towards Buddhism in Ambedkar's way. I would say that that is the only religion where the founder of the religion says that you become your own lamp.
He's becoming what?
You become your own lamp.
Aha.
Attadipa bhava, that's what he says. Now, if the religious founder of the religion says that you are your own lamp, that is also instigating a challenge to the founder himself. Secondly, he says that whatever is universal in my preaching, you maintain that, and whatever is not universal, it is specific to my era, you can shed it away. Now, this is something very different kind of religion we are talking about. At the same time, thirdly, he would say that there is one in Pali, it is Verena samanti verani kudachana, Verena samanti esa dhammo sanantano. So when he says that these are the many things are the enemy of people, the thing like we should be not angry with anybody and etc. etc. But he says that though I am against caste system, though I am against Brahmanism, though I am against Vedikism, he says that never the enmity is the answer to the enmity.
Never what?
Enmity is not answer to the enmity. Non-enmity is answer to the enmity.
Enmity or anger is not
Yeah.
an answer to anger.
Yeah. Now these kind of things are very different from any religion in the world, main religions in the world. So this religion makes you see for yourself, and there is a more detailed quotation from his preaching is that you don't accept things because I said it or somebody else said it. You examine it, not only you examine it, but you should experience it. Through experience, you should test it, and then only you accept it. So this is very, very, today also it is modern, very modern. So even the philosophies become sort of very much revered, and not, people say that you should not question Marx in particular period, you should not question this and you should not question that, because that is a founder's words. This is something different. So I think America or Europe or wherever, it is gives some very, very modern thing which could be studied more, and you will see that it is consistent with even 21st century.
I think if we ask why Ambedkar was attracted to Buddhism, it was for some of these reasons. Buddhism gave scope to, and even gave direction to you judge for yourself. And this appealed to Ambedkar's rationalism. Ambedkar, in that sense, was a very rationalistic person. He wanted a rationalistic religion, and he thought he found this in Buddhism.
The professor at Columbia University that he quotes most often and says was my most important influence, at least at Columbia, was John Dewey, who some of you know was the founder, one of the founders of American pragmatism. And Dewey taught that ideas, like tools, are fabricated, created, constructed to solve a problem in life that confronts you right here and now. An idea is a way of considering and resolving questions that come up in life. But life keeps changing, and history keeps changing, and society poses different challenges. And ideas which were formulated for a previous time or a previous social system should be discarded. They don't come down from heaven. They're not inscribed in stone or in gold or something. They are simply expendable because new ideas are required in order to address this. And over his lifetime, I think Ambedkar began to see that Dewey's pragmatism was actually very, very congruent with what Bharat just told us about the Buddha's Dhamma, which is that if you try an idea, a teaching, a spiritual teaching or a philosophical idea out in your life, and it seems workable, it seems useful, it makes your life better, you feel healthier, more effective, then embrace it. If it doesn't, try something else. Go to a different teacher if you need to. Read a different book, or burn the book. Burn the book. This Manu Smriti that she mentioned is the book of Manu. Manu was the great Hindu lawgiver, and among the laws in that book were that if a Dalit or untouchable person hears the Sanskrit, then molten lead will be poured into his ear, and of course the result will be obvious, he will die. If he tries to speak or utter even a word of Sanskrit, his tongue will be cut out. These kinds of things were imposed upon untouchables because Sanskrit was the pure language only of Brahmins. And if the shadow of a Dalit falls on the foot of a Brahmin, that untouchable must be punished, and the Brahmin must be purified by going to a temple or something like that. So this book was burned by Ambedkar during the Mahad Satyagraha that Gail mentioned at the beginning of her talk. So burning a book, a holy book, a sacred book, burning a Bible, that was shocking stuff. And so again, as she said at the end, we hear so much about Gandhi and the techniques which were picked up, rightly so, by the American Civil Rights Movement. Passive resistance, nonviolent social change. We can attribute some of these to Gandhi, but these ideas were already in the air. And so Ambedkar was using the same techniques of truth force, satyagraha, in his agitations to gain access to drinking water, to temple worship, and to all of the rights and privileges of being a human being in a society. But nobody's ever heard of this other guy. So Dewey's philosophy, a very kind of American way of looking at things, had one element in what Ambedkar, who had a huge mind, pulled together from all of his education in New York and London and in India. And his library was vast. I've spent a lot of time with his own books looking at the sentences that he underlined in the Buddhist books, and the notes in his very, very careful and highly legible English notes in the margins of his books in Siddharth College Library there. And you can see how he picked and chose or rejected teachings from the traditional Buddhist scriptures that he felt would be of inspiration and help to his community. So he was picking and choosing. As John Dewey suggested, you must weed the garden. Get rid of the weeds, cultivate the blooms. He was doing that with the literature of Buddhism to create this new vehicle. Fascinating, fascinating. And as Bharat said, you can't find religious leaders who are willing to say, try this out, see if it works, see if it's wholesome. Kushala, not unwholesome akushala. That's an old Buddhist idea. Other questions? Yes?
Did the role of women change in the Mahayana movement?
The role of women.
What?
What is the role of women in this
What?
movement? The role of women in this movement.
That's a good question. Women played a very important role, but it was mainly a subordinate one. I mean, you don't find, as far as I know, of any very famous women figures who were spokespersons for Buddhism at the time. They were followers. Ambedkar's there's no sign that his second wife ever became a Buddhist, is there?
She considered herself a Buddhist.
She
I met
considered
her,
herself a
yeah.
Buddhist. Okay,
She carried his
Okay.
torch in every respect.
okay.
Into her 90s, by the
Okay.
way.
Ramabai, no. His first wife was too traditional and too young. Other women, I'm not aware of, really, of
Well,
any.
my class has actually read Eleanor's chapter on women in Ambedkar Buddhism, so they know
Okay.
quite a bit about this,
Okay.
actually.
They
And
probably
it's
know
an
more
interesting
about it than I do.
chapter. And I think that, for example, Meenakshi Moon and quite a few of these
Well,
women have been
Meenakshi Moon, I mean, these are women who came later.
later. Right, not during the time of Ambedkar, but in the movement.
Not during the time of Ambedkar. So
Yeah.
that's sort of what I was taking. Is,
He was very clear on the equality of men and women, and that Girl and Boy Scout movement that you saw on the slides that I showed. These young women and these young men certainly see themselves as equal in the struggle, in the battle, as he called it, for equality. And yes, go ahead.
Related to this, question is that it is based on my opinion, but whether you also think that Ambedkar was weaker on question of women's
Was
liberation.
what?
Ambedkar was weaker on the question of women's liberation than Mahatma Phule, who considered.
Compared to Phule, I think he was. Yeah, I mean, Ambedkar played an important role, of course, at the time of the Hindu Code Bill. As we all know, he chaired the committee which brought the Hindu Code Bill in the legislature and tried to fight for its passage, but ultimately failed, and when it failed, he resigned. But at the same time, he in some ways had traditional, I think, somewhat traditional, or you could say bourgeois feminist ideas about women's place being in the home and man being the breadwinner of the family, and so forth. Now, Phule, in contrast, Jyotirao Phule, for those of you who don't know, was a very important social radical of the 19th century in India. He was a predecessor to Ambedkar. Phule argued that women and Shudras, Stri Shudra, these were the oppressed sections of Indian society. Phule said women are superior to men in so many ways, and they deserve our support and all kinds of strength. So, in this sense, Ambedkar was relatively weak. If you look at him from a sort of militant women's liberationist perspective. Yeah.
Let me just amplify that a bit, though, because he did address very large groups of women, and there are pictures, wonderful.
Yeah.
One of the wonderful pictures I have in my study is him addressing about 70,000 women in Mumbai, challenging them to obtain education and to liberate themselves in whatever ways possible. Phule is a good example of a 19th century reformer whose wife, Savitribai, by the way, you have to mention her,
Yeah.
founded the first high
School
schools
for
for girls. And so the one that you saw that was founded by my friend is in a long tradition of girls' education that goes back to Mahatma Phule and his wife Savitribai in the 19th century. So Ambedkar clearly saw himself in that area, but I think he was torn by so many areas of talent that he had. We were just talking about a book he wrote. He wrote so many different books, this many books, okay? That's the shelf full of books. One of them is called Who Were the Shudras? That is the slave or the laborer caste in India. And he did a very sophisticated historical and literary analysis of the word for caste in India, showing that it's not a racial category, it's a social category, and so on. But he was doing scholarly work, political work, social work, and so on. He was just, so he may not have emphasized the women's question the way some others might have done. But I think that clearly a lot of amazing women came out of that movement, because I know I met quite a few of them, and they're alive and on fire. There are various popular groups, rock bands. There are what we'd call rap groups made up of women who are demanding equality. There are groups from South India that blew me away during 2006 there, where they got up and they were dancing and singing and declaiming their rights, and they were really scary in a great way, in a wonderful way, because they were so empowered and so ferocious. So, I mean, there's an awful lot going on there, and I think that once you open the Pandora's box, all kinds of things begin to percolate out. And I think it's fair to say, I think you would agree, in India right now, the whole question of the victimization of women, these rape situations that go on every single day all over India that are not even investigated by the police, that is being very much taken into the streets. And after the rapes last January, which was all the talk of India when I was there in January, that may not be limited to the Ambedkar movement, but anyway, women are beginning to say, wait a minute, we deserve a lot more than we've ever gotten. Bharat, yeah.
No, because there were two movements. There was Kailaji. No, I will respond to this in such a way that, this movement against rape, which took place and taking place in Delhi and cities like Mumbai, these are very important movements, and they are rightfully so, and they are coming forward in a very strong way. But at the same time, Ambedkar movement, women from Ambedkarite movement, they came against rapes which were taking place in the rural areas, which were ignored and had been ignored many, many years, and even current years, by the city women's groups.
Yeah.
And there were strong movement against that after Khairlanji, which was very, very great kind of atrocious incidents which took place. So they are now comparing, the Ambedkarite women's movement is asking a question that when your I'm not saying they are justified in using some words, but when your women are raped, you have this candle marches and etc.
In a suburb of Nagpur, a family was hacked to death and distributed in a drainage ditch for a variety of reasons. But this Dalit family was killed and murdered and raped. The women raped, dismembered, scattered. Partly because the girl of the family had just gotten a scholarship to go to college, and that was deeply resented by the Brahmins who ran the village. Also, their vegetable gardens were being trampled every day as a shortcut to the fields by those landowners who were simply trampling this family's vegetable garden. And when they began protesting the fact that this was a violation of their property, one thing led to another, and finally the whole family was dead. The police did not investigate until the police station was burned to the ground by the community. Then finally the press began to take some notice that once again a family was killed by caste violence in the rural area, and so then the press became interested, and then finally there was some court inquest into this, and a few arrests were made. But the other one I want to tell is that just a few years in Nagpur, once again, my neighbor across the street came across with a printout from his computer. He said, "Do you know this Nagpur?" I said, "Yeah, I go there. My friends live there." He says, "Well, this is what happened in the court yesterday in Nagpur. There was a serial rapist who was a highborn boy, kept raping women in the poor area of the town year after year. And he would be brought before the judge. The judge would give him a week in jail, a small slap on the wrist, and he'd be back out on the street reoffending." So finally he was on the dock in the court, once again, the same deal. And all of his victims, about 50 women, came in the courtroom with curry powder, with cayenne pepper. And when people tried to stop them, they threw cayenne pepper into people's eyes. They stabbed the guy right on the witness stand, left him bleeding to death, and they left. A couple of arrests were made, but those women were released because the whole city realized they were in the right. So that was justice in that situation. So that's the women's movement in India at the moment. So next question. Very good. Thank you for that question. Go ahead.
Namaste, Dr. Goyal. Thank you for coming here and enlightening us about Dr. Ambedkar's belief. And my question is, what do you think the most pressing issue today?
The most what?
Pressing
Wait.
issue, Dalit community as a whole in India, and particularly Dalit women in modern India.
What is the most pressing challenge to Dalit women in India today, or the whole Dalit community? What is the most pressing challenge for them
Most
today?
pressing challenge is probably simply to live a life of dignity and equality. I mean, this itself in a caste society in a society that continues to practice caste discrimination is a challenge. I mean, we've seen with the Karlanji example how people trying to practice simply agriculture as others did got people, atrocities were committed because of this. So just living a normal life of human equality and dignity is itself a challenge in a society that practices discrimination.
Yes.
And another second question is, like, I know about inequality in Dalit in India, but how about like there are also inequality in America in many places between like genders. So how you think, are they related, or inequality between like caste system in India, but also in America, there are a lot of inequalities between genders, and what do you think?
Okay, so if I understand the question properly, is what is the difference between caste inequality and, let's say, racial inequality in America, or gender inequality, or the inequality, let's say, of the able-bodied and the disabled person, and so on?
What is the
Well,
difference between caste inequalities and non-caste inequalities?
How is it unique? How is
one
caste
thing about
unique?
Ambedkar had given two very important concepts. That caste is not a division of labor, but a division of laborers. And he also said it's a system of graded inequality. Well, what does graded inequality mean? It means it's not simply a matter of binary exploitation of capitalists exploiting workers and landlords exploiting peasants and so on. It's one in which there's a gradation. So at the top, there may be pure exploiters, Brahmins. At the bottom, there may be the purely exploited, Dalits. But at the middle levels of the society, there are groups that are both exploiters and exploited. That is the middle caste, the non-Brahmin castes, peasant castes, all in some sense take part in extraction of the surplus from the lowest levels, and at the same time their own surplus labor is extracted and pumped up to the top. But so they themselves are exploited, but they're also sharing exploitation. Because of this, it's very difficult. Because of this, you have the division of laborers. It's very difficult to maintain unity in a system of this sort. Unity among the exploited, because the exploited are not in fact united. So I think, these are maybe the two basic things that will make a difference. Gender equality. Well, in India, gender inequality is very much bound up with caste. As you know, women, because if marriages are to remain endogamous within the caste, that means that girl sexuality in particular has to be controlled. And that means child marriages, controlled sexuality, pressures on women, and so forth. So it's often said that women and Shudras hold the same position. And in a sense they do, but the whole issue of women's inequality and oppression is bound up with caste in Indian society.
Ambedkar actually made, as Gail just said, he made a very interesting contribution to the scholarship, the study of caste, which is to look at the psychology of the person in the middle. And most, 99% of the people are in the middle, because you have a few people at the very top, like the super rich in America, and then you have a lot of people at the bottom, but you have a lot of people in the middle, let's say the middle class. You are being actually exploited by the people above you, your bosses and so on, because of caste. It's more vicious than just having a boss at work who tells you what to do. And so you are chafing from that every day when you come home, is somebody is treating you with disrespect. So what do you do with that? You find somebody who's lower than you, just a little bit lower, and you treat them with disrespect. And presumably that makes you feel better. So it's the kick the dog or pecking order psychology that he really wrote about that in a way nobody else has ever did. Ambedkar did.
Yeah.
He talked about the psychology of this and why it is hard to stamp this out, because to take away the caste system means I no longer have somebody under me to kick around. Even if I'm low caste, there's always somebody lower than me. And if I run out of lower caste people, there's always my wife, right? Okay, next.
I just have a clarification question for you about the caste system. Right now in India, is there any current maintained laws that actually enforce this, or is it all psychological now?
Well, it's been illegal since Ambedkar's constitution was ratified by the Indian government. Article 11 outlaws the practice of untouchability and caste. And actually, Gail mentioned this other code bill, which gives rights to women, family inheritance rights, and so forth. So much of the things we're discussing is totally illegal. It's criminal. It's just not prosecuted.
I meant more like we have trouble here still with some subtle things with racism and things like that, and genderism. They're sort of on the books in some states, but they're not. Is it sort of like that as well?
Very much so. There are very bad areas to live in. I mean, if you go, maybe you correct me if I'm wrong, but I've always heard this. I've never been to the state of Kerala. But in Kerala, women apparently have a little bit more respect and they're better educated. And in fact, the whole economy demonstrates that. The state of Kerala is a much more prosperous economy because women have a little bit more respect. Isn't that true? The state of Kerala? Yeah. But you go to certain areas, like say very, very poor state like Bihar, and it's just terrifying. Yeah. Yes.
So something that we're learning about in our Buddhism class is that past karma is something that establishes where you're at in your life right now. Like presumably, if you're an untouchable, you might have done something to like deserve that position. And I was wondering, in your experience, how that has been translated or felt by the untouchable community, or the untouchable community that supposedly no longer exists.
So is karma something that most Ambedkar followers do believe in, or have they been able to reject that idea the way he recommended? We reject this idea of karma and rebirth.
I think the older generation, probably the first generation of Buddhists simply took it as, a slogan, and Then the second generation began to be affected by traditional ideas within Buddhism, but the younger generation many of them reject the idea of karma along with.
So if you go to the university, you
Ambedkar.
probably...
That way they're concerned about being genuine Navayana Buddhists.
So the emphasis is not on like a blaming sort of.
Hmm?
The emphasis is not a blaming dynamic, but rather moving forward.
No, I think what Gail is saying is a very dramatic thing all over the world, which is that education cuts through superstition no matter where you are in the world. And that's certainly why I think Ambedkar stressed, you take that slogan, educate, agitate, organize. There's a little bit of debate over whether agitate and organize are in which order, but nobody debates that educate is the first priority. And once you go for education, whether it's in India or the US, you begin questioning fundamental assumptions, the way John Dewey would suggest, and to say, what scientific proof do we have of rebirth or of some mysterious metaphysical idea of karma? I mean, if you take intelligence tests of kids who were given the same opportunities in a classroom, it equals out. So you can't say that somebody is stupider or smarter because they're past rebirth or something like that, and so on. So karma and rebirth just evaporates in the light of education. So young people in India, middle-class kids, they're going to college, maybe they're studying IT or they're studying management or whatever. They're getting an education and realize that karma doesn't play any role in it. It's whether you study for your exams and you master your skills and you can move ahead in society. It's about worth, not birth.
Yeah. In recent decades, the IT industry has boomed in India. And how much have those of the caste system benefited from that or not benefited?
How much is what?
How much have Dalit people benefited from the booming of the information technology industry?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question. Because of reservations, a large section now have been able to get some form of education and move ahead. And they're very interested in IT. You find Dalit e-groups and websites and blogs and all of these things. Probably in this sense, Dalits are ahead of many non-Brahmins in this respect. Although, Brahmins tend to monopolize the field of IT as much as elsewhere. But Dalits are definitely moving in, and they're definitely interested in and involved in information technology.
Yeah. And many of them go to the most elite institutes like the IITs, or Indian Institutes of Technology, or IIM, Indian Institutes of Management. The elites are admitted through, she used the word reservation a minute ago. That's what we call affirmative action, same concept, okay? We reserve certain seats from people from different communities. And the same issues come up there, which is if you're in a reserved seat or you had a scholarship, then the Brahmins or the upper class students will say, you were stupid, but they let you in anyway because of affirmative action. And the same thing here. So the big fight we're having right now, it's been in the Supreme Court, it looks like it's coming up again in Michigan right now, is about whether or not it's time to retire the concept of affirmative action because maybe it hurts minorities who are then viewed as being less able in admissions because they were brought in. I mean, Harvard has wrestled with this for a long time, but has done actually very well, I think, in finding extremely competent people from all backgrounds and so on. But, you can drive from end to end of India and you will not run out of cell phone connectivity. And I can't get it in my town in Western Massachusetts. So a lot of kids have smartphones. I have a stupid phone here. And so you tell me that those Dalit kids are not going to be a lot more connected and informed than at least I am living in Western Mass. One more question, and then I think we should eat some of this tasty food back there. Yes, Kane. Anybody who hasn't spoken yet would like to ask a question? Okay, Kane.
Dr.
What is the most significant, could you say accomplishment or challenge? Challenge that you face as an activist in this movement? Like what do you struggle with the most as a person who's a scholar activist?
Well, in a sense, I'm reaching the age where I'm no longer so active anymore.
I love it. I love that answer.
What is the most challenging?
Well, looking back, I mean, you've been in India for
Yeah.
30 years,
Yeah.
right? So what were
Yeah.
the hardest things that you had to confront as someone trying to make a career as a scholar?
Again, that's a hard question to answer. I mean, I'm not sure. Just doing your job day by day and carrying on the struggle when there's no immediate sense that you're really achieving something. Although we had a fairly strong movement of abandoned women, women deserted by their husbands, that had a lot of success. I mean, that was probably one of the most important areas of my activism. So the challenges include both, carrying on when things don't look so encouraging, when they're moving slow, when they seem to be moving slowly, and yet you want to keep on and not lose sight of your goal.
Do you feel there's hope for India?
Huh?
Is there hope for India?
Of course.
Better than living in the little boxes.
Yes.
Oh, is that
Definitely.
all right?
Better than living in little boxes.
We're
Better than what?
escaping from those little
Living in the
boxes.
little boxes.
Escaping the little boxes, he says.
Huh?
Escaping those little boxes that you talked about. A lot of people are doing it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you all for your questions, and please enjoy some food. And well, let's thank our guests.
Thank you.